Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. Today, we are going to talk about sibling rivalry, a phrase that I think is no doubt very familiar to almost everyone. And part of growing up with a brother or a sister or, more than one brother and sister is what goes on there. And of course, birth order contributes to it. How do we find our own individual different nature from a competitive brother or sister? And of course, mythology and fairy tales are famous for depicting sibling rivals, most famously perhaps Cain and Abel, but then we have Cinderella and her hostile siblings. And this kind of sibling rivalry, resentments, competition, what have you, can continue well into adulthood when we might say to ourselves, oh my goodness, am I still not over that? No, there's always unfinished business from the past many a time. So let's dive in and talk about sibling rivalry.
And of course, this is something that comes into the consulting room. I'm sort of going through my current caseload, and siblings and difficult relationships with siblings and sibling rivalry are certainly something that comes up. I'm also thinking about how kind of deeply, deeply archetypal it is. One of my guilty pleasures is watching nest cams, which are, naturalists will rig up cameras that show you kind of the goings on in often in raptor nests. And it's just, you get these baby birds, and one is often hatched one day, and the next day another one hatches, and then maybe the third day. And so you've got these birds, and they're all, weak and in need of a great deal of care. And the mama bird comes up, or the father bird, with a big bug or part of a rabbit leg or something, and they're all just, they've got their mouths wide open, and they're just kind of trying to shove each other out of the way. And you just really get that, where there's a dearth of resources, if you think about it in this really kind of primal way. There is something in us that wants to shove our sibling out of the way and get whatever resources might be available. And of course, that can be heightened in an environment of lack.
And that, by extension, travels right over, practically undiluted, to the human realm. That in most cases, or so one would hope, it's not about physical food, but it is about parental resources for time, care, affection, attention, the psychic food that we all need. If there's only one kid, that child may not realize for years that there was some deprivation in terms of parental resources. But if there's another kid, both of them are wired for, wait a minute, he got this much and I only got that much. I'm going to get more.
But fairness becomes like a major theme.
Yes,
Yes, it does.
Fairness becomes a really major theme. And I have to tell the story of this European researcher who trained monkeys. I think they were bonobos. And both these monkeys could see one another. So monkey A and monkey B are facing each other, each in their own cage. They've been taught the same trick, which I'll say is press a lever, get a reward upon a command. So the researcher is there. He's taught them both what to do. He looks at monkey A, gives the command. Monkey A presses the lever, gets a slice of cucumber. He turns to, and monkey B's watching. Then he turns to monkey B, gives the command. Monkey B presses the lever, gets a slice of banana. At which point, monkey A literally goes ape shit. Sorry, couldn't help it. I did the same thing he did. I get cucumber and he gets the much to be preferred banana. And there we have sibling rivalry. How come he got more?
Yeah, like there's an innate sense of what is fair and what is unfair. And you see this. I mean, I think, maybe just to sort of set this up, all three of us have siblings. And then Deb and I are parents of siblings. So we've kind of had this experience early on. But it really, my kids were just obsessed with who got more, who do you love more? That was just a constant question. Who do you love more?
They would just ask you straight out.
Oh, all the time. And I had this super annoying answer. I would say, well, you're my favorite boy and she's my favorite girl, which was so sort of lucky.
But it's like, oh, come on, Mom.
I know. They did not like that answer. So, yeah.
Which goes to the issue of status.
Mm-hmm.
That siblings are very attuned to status and who is at the top of the herd.
And usually, as the oldest of my siblings, I will say I was very aware of having top status. Not only in addition to my incredibly precocious mind and physical capabilities, it's just because I had a 16-month age advantage over my sister. And think about the difference between a 16-month-old and a newborn who's, can't do anything. So I was always aware of being a little bit ahead and having the competitive edge when it came to performance kinds of things. And my earliest, I've got to tell this story, it just came up, but I have to do this. My earliest experience of feeling empathy was when I realized one day not only that my younger sister was so annoying and so incompetent and difficult, but I had the insight that my mother must feel the same way. So I can still see where I was in the kitchen, where I offer this comment on my sister Priscilla that she can't do this and she doesn't do that and she's always in the way. And you feel the same way too. It's like that for you too, Mom, right? And I think why I remember this is because of the smile that my mother gave, of that adult smile of, oh my God, that's so funny. It's so cute. And that my empathic offering was not received in quite the manner I intended it.
Oh, Mom, you and I have to put up with that other one. It's terrible.
That was exactly it.
There you were, being a little therapist at that age.
Yes, exactly. But I honestly couldn't see why this sort of inept kid was taking up so much time and energy and resources.
My older sister claims she remembers we were about 1 3/4 years apart. But when I was brought home and put in the crib, she remembers looking through the bars and just feeling murderous. Just really wanted to take me out.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. That a younger sibling is. What are they for? Why would you want that when you already had me?
Yes, but disrupting. I think the firstborn gets this lavish amount of attention.
Yeah.
By comparison. And then the next puppy is born and she's been deposed, at least for a while. And that is hard. I mean, it's really difficult for a kid.
Yeah.
And I think, it just, yeah, I mean, again, I think it has such kind of an archetypal root, right? There is that sense of having a companion. There's like another one. There's another puppy in the litter. You're not alone. But on the other hand, you've been replaced. And I think at a very deep level, we
Hmm.
can experience it as a kind of rejection, and that it can be a very deep wound to have a sibling born, which is a terrible thing to kind of know as a parent, because you don't want to inflict that on your child, and yet it is a gift to give your child a sibling. I think that having a sibling in adulthood is a wonderful thing in many ways. If you do happen to get along, I mean, you have that incredible touch point of having gone through the same childhood,
Exactly.
and
Yes.
also that you're not alone in the world. There's someone else who was there at your beginning or very close to your beginning, if you're the elder sibling, who may be with you for most of your life, and there's no one else like that.
And I think that realization comes on much later in life.
Yes. Yeah, you don't realize that
Yeah.
when you're 18 months old staring at your baby brother.
That's right. Where you're still, competing
Yeah.
for really fundamental access to resources. Yeah.
There is only, one or two, whoever your siblings are, witnesses to the same childhood, and each person experiences it differently. But who else knows about how mom always did that and dad never did this, and the time when, and the list goes on. There are no other witnesses that were in the same basic position as you, except your sibs.
So that goes to the fact that later in life, and often in early adulthood, we kind of rediscover our siblings in a different way, which I think is normal because it takes so much libido to
Mhm.
just get your brain on track, to learn what you need to learn, to deal with socializing in all the different environments.
Mhm.
I think that we don't always give our siblings a lot of attention early on because all the resources are going to just growing up.
And we want to launch and get out there on our own,
Yeah.
and we leave our sibling behind.
This week, we interpret a dream from one of our subscribers. We chew over the content of the dream. And, we find a little thing stuck in our craw, kind of work it out a little bit. And this is one of the great benefits of being a subscriber. You get to share your dreams and answer your questions, the stuff that's stuck in your craw that you kind of want to work out, and you'd like our help doing that. So, in this week's dream, somebody dreams about a problem with one of their teeth that the dream maker brings to their attention. And they've got to figure out what to do about this. So, join us. Become a subscriber. Go to Patreon, help us out, and we'd love to chew over some of your dreams as well.
So we've talked about the competition and kind of being rivals for parental resources, but the other difficulties between siblings can be estrangement, and just indifference in adulthood. I did have a sibling. I don't know. We just aren't in touch much, maybe a couple times a year. We don't have anything in common. Or the resentment of, nope, I don't talk to so-and-so.
I think that those early experiences of rivalry can take on a life of their own and continue to reverberate even through adult relationships. So, you see, otherwise perfectly normal, healthy, professional adults who really regress to a kind of infantile state when sibling rivalry issues come up. So when you find out that mom and dad told your sister first about this new development in the family, and you just feel devastated and you want to call someone up and ream them out, or another big flashpoint that many siblings lose touch over is when both parents die, when one or both parents die, and there are issues that come up around the settlement of the estate, which usually are not about money. On the surface, it looks like they're about money, but really it's about, I've never felt like I got what I deserved, and here it is again. And I've known more than one family where siblings stop speaking to each other at that
Yep.
point. And that's an estrangement can go on at that point.
The issue of fairness comes up as well, that one person in the family lives nearby an elderly parent or an ailing parent, and the other siblings live further afield. And, yes, sure, we get it. I'm in the same town, and two other siblings are far afield. But the sibling who's there day in and day out can resent it, and then resent the settling of the estate, that there were three of us. One supplied 80 to 85% of the care, and then everything is divided equally. That the money could or should symbolize how a more a different kind of distribution of resources. The one who gave the most should get the most, represented by dollars. So it can be a sticky business well into maturity.
And if we're going to kind of put a Jungian take on this, one of the ways to do that is to remember that siblings, especially in our dreams, especially same-sex siblings, will often carry shadow. So, and I think it's a very natural thing that siblings tend to take up different positions in the family. So, this
Yes.
one's the smart one, this one's the funny one, or something.
Yeah.
And that can naturally kind of lead to this shadow development. So whatever doesn't get claimed and developed by me becomes part of my shadow, which not entirely coincidentally is often what is most claimed and developed in my sibling. So I have a sister, I'm a younger sister, and my sister is very, very good at all things kind of sensate and visual. She's actually an extraordinarily talented garden designer. And she, her house is just beautiful. And she just has excellent taste. And when she does anything like involving a kind of manipulating the physical world, it's always just exquisite. And that's so different from me, right? I mean, I couldn't design a garden if my life depended on it. When I'm manipulating the physical world, I'm often kind of awkward. My house does not look like her house at all, and I just am not that sensate. And I mean, some of it is probably the way we were born, but certainly it got reinforced because we kind of were assigned / claimed these different things. I was going to be the people person and the person who was really interested in feelings and motivations. And she's this person who is very, very focused on physical things. So what that means is, if I have a dream about my sister, for example, I'm going to want to be curious about how might this be about something that's in the shadow for me? And it might be something having to do with my sensate ability in my case.
And the same, I think, is very true, out there in the so-called real world and in fairy tales, that we see our shadows in the sister who's always doing this or excelling at that, or something like Cinderella and her mean stepsisters. What if we see this as part of one psyche and the stepsisters are part of Cinderella's shadow? And I do think some of it comes along, just as you're saying, you and your sister so different, Lisa. And my sister, who's really close in age to me, and I are hugely different. So that's reflected and documented really well in an article in this week's New York Times Sunday magazine on siblings. And they mention a family, the Goffs, and each of the 4 children became really a stellar achiever, but each of them found a different way to do it. So the eldest was really did really, really well in school. The next one, who grew up to be a writer, turned in a more introverted direction and wrote books. And then the third one, like, gosh, what's left for me? Well, what about athletics? And the fourth one also, one was into swimming and the next one's into soccer. So it's we have to find a space that's that's just me, and carve it out for ourselves. Sometimes, there's the shadow of, I wish my house looked like, a designer had done it. I wish everything was gorgeous and beautiful. And then the sister looks at us and goes, gosh, I wish I were more like that. But, it's a question of how do we use it?
I think that when we talk about shadow, it's important that shadow can be dark shadow or golden shadow. Because I've certainly, in my analysis, seen younger brothers idealizing the older brother who was the captain of the football team or wildly successful in one way or another. And if there was a kind of generosity from the older towards the younger, that the older brother can become a hero in their eyes, as well as carrying the disowned, antisocial components as well. So that's still a way of alienating from oneself. So if all the heroic energy goes into the older brother, then I'm not going to live that out, and I'll be whatever is left.
That's right.
So we can become impoverished by casting too much golden shadow on our siblings as well.
Yeah, and oftentimes, what's in the shadow is not something that you consciously value, right? So it would be easy for me, I don't do this, but it would be easy for me to look at my sister and say, oh, that's so shallow, I mean, I think that's a place where any of us might go easily, is to devalue what we haven't developed and claimed. And then, of course, we have the dream with the shadow figure, perhaps a sibling, kind of showing us that we haven't valued something that could really be vivifying, that really is ours. So, in fact, I looked at my sister and I'm like in awe, But there are ways in which I'm sure I let some of those qualities lapse into the shadow and didn't develop them, didn't claim them, because, as you're saying, Joseph and Deb, she kind of already had that domain,
And devaluing is a way of managing envy. So if there's something my sibling has and it makes me feel bad, but I still want to be in relationship to a sibling, stripping the value out of the thing I envy allows there still to be room for the other person because I'm not blocked by the envy as much.
In terms of the shadow dynamic, I want to bring up a fairy tale that I think encompasses this really well. It's a Scandinavian fairy tale called Tatterhood. And just really briefly, there's a queen who really wants to have a child, and she hasn't managed to have one. And she's told by a beggar woman how to do it. So the beggar woman says you have to wash your feet and then throw the dirty water from washing your feet under the bed. And then in the morning, you'll wake up and there will be two flowers growing under the bed. One will be white and one will be black. Eat the white one, don't eat the black one. So the queen does as she's told, and indeed, there are flowers growing under the bed. And she eats the white flower, and it's delicious. So she's like, I'm going to eat the black flower too. So she does. And 9 months later, she delivers this perfect, blonde, blue-eyed, beautiful baby girl. And right after, she delivers a little girl who is wearing a tattered cloak and rides around on a goat and holds a spoon, a wooden spoon in her hand. And she's so horrified by the second child who shouts, "Mama!" She says, "If I'm your mama, God help me." So she tried. The second child's named Tatterhood. she tries to hide Tatterhood away and only wants to kind of give attention to the beautiful child. But Tatterhood and her sister are very, very close. And I'll just tell you that, the fairy tale goes on. It's a really beautiful fairy tale. But what happens is when tragedy strikes, it's Tatterhood who knows what to do. And so we can have these kind of shadow children, sometimes in families where one child is very, very valued and the other child carries shadow. And often the child carries our shadow if we're a parent. And you can also read this tale as that Tatterhood and her sister are two parts of a single psyche, one part which is valued and another part that wants to get hidden away. So there's a lot in that tale. When you support us on Patreon, you get access to bonus content, and you can also submit your dreams and questions to us for discussion for our bonus content. This week, we look at a dream about a problem with the dreamer's tooth, which of course is a very common dream theme. If you want to hear what we have to say about it, sign up for our bonus content. And I'll tell you, you also get to hear Joseph Lee's confession about flossing.
I'm so busted.
So many other siblings in religious and other mythology, fairy tales, etc. Siblings and sibling rivalry and who's the favorite is a really big theme, and who gets chosen. There's Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, Romulus and Remus. And in the women, we've already mentioned Cinderella. Now there's Tatterhood. There's Seth and Osiris, Mary and Martha, Leah and Rachel, Clytemnestra and Helen. Of how different the experiences and the rivalry can be between brothers and sisters.
And the social system has a lot to contribute to that. For instance, not until fairly recently, the eldest son would automatically inherit the entire estate. And whoever was born after that was thought of as the spare. You have the heir and then the spare. So if something happens to your heir, then you've got one in the chute, to take the role. But if you're not the firstborn son, you're on your own. Either you're going to be working for your brother or you're out seeking your fortunes somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so knowing that you're not the firstborn for ages and ages meant that you were disenfranchised. And that undoubtedly had an enormous impact.
I'm working my way through the, I guess it's a Masterpiece Theater program, Marie Antoinette.
Oh, really?
And, it's fabulous. But that is really highlighted with Louis what was it? He was the Louis the 16th. And he has a younger brother who just, in the show anyway, just wants a piece of it. And it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
It is not going to go well. It's doomed from the beginning because he's never going to be able to be incorporated in a constructive way into the power structure. He's always going to be a little bit of an outsider, which means he's going to be disgruntled and full of grievance and resentment. And that can absolutely be part of a sibling dynamic. And it's interesting because I think another television show that I will just run up the flagpole here is Succession, which is now a few years old, but is all about a sibling rivalry as they each try to jockey to take the lead role in the company.
I'm thinking about a couple of things of other ways that this can play out is where one child in the family is exceptionally talented. Not just birth order, not just sort of royalty, but is, let's say, an outstanding athlete. So everybody always wants to go to his tennis games or basketball games. And the other kids who are not as talented or didn't have the opportunity are a little bit left in the lurch. sort of extending this heir and spare theme. How do we get our moment in the sun? What about me? No, yeah, we'll see you later, honey. We're going off to watch Tommy play Tommy's basketball game. And it does go back, Joseph, as you lifted up, to the ancient and not so ancient practice of leaving the estate to the eldest son. Because if you divide it up, if you have 3 sons and you divide your estate into thirds, and then they have children, pretty soon there won't be anything left. So it all has to go to one person. And then there were sort of established roles for the other sons, if there were successive sons. And that's where we see Cain and Abel, that Abel's the eldest son. He's going to be the farmer. He works with dad every day out in the fields, presumably. Next kid comes along named Abel, and he's relegated to the duty of being the shepherd. So he is the outsider. Off he goes with all the sheep, wandering the hills, keeping the flock together, versus Cain, the eldest son, who works with dad every day in the field. And then when it comes time to offer God the first fruits, Cain is able to offer lots of produce, and Abel is able to offer sheep. That is really where the trouble starts. And the offering that Abel can provide of the sheep and meat was very highly valued in ancient times. There wasn't much of it. We see it in Greek mythology and so on. That offering is preferred. And there have been so many interpretations about this tale. But I would like to offer that that's just the way it often is. These things happen. They happen in every family. A parent is closer to one child than another. They have temperaments that are particularly well aligned. The child demonstrates a kind of proficiency somewhere that gets parental attention. And so it goes. Brothers and sisters in particular have rivalry, and there is simply a fact of human existence that can't just be explained away within the framework of what's fair. It's introduction to, this is just the givens, that you have this brother or sister, brothers, sisters, that's how it is.
And it has so much to do with indexing on the parents. Cain doesn't know that bringing wheat and squash and potatoes is a bad thing. I mean, he's proud of it. He's worked, for months to get these things to fruit. He's proud of it. He wants to give it. Abel is also, shepherding in the fields, brings a lamb. They're both equally proud of what they have generated, and they don't know it's a problem. They both put it on the fire and expect, the gods or God to enjoy, the smoke of the sacrifice. And so it's surprising and shocking, I think, to Cain to discover that the thing that he prizes isn't valuable to the great Father in the sky. It's shocking. And all of a sudden, the thing that he valued now has no value because the great Father doesn't find it preferable.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the enormous power that the parents have over how the children are going to see each other and how they are going to prioritize or deprioritize what they're going to bring forward. Because naturally, you'll prefer to bring forward the thing that is praised.
But I just want to sort of press against that a little bit, because I think that, in a way, it is the great Father in the sky. And in that sense, it is sort of, I don't know, like nature itself, right? And not maybe just the personal parents. I mean, the truth is, and Deb, I think I'm picking up kind of what you said, like like, the truth is that the world values some things more than others. And it may not be fair, but it's kind of the just so of things.
Yes.
And so, I mean, Joseph, you're absolutely right that it does operate on the level of the parents. And there are certainly families where, both kids might have a real talent, but the parents only really value one over the other. And there's this sort of larger level, I think is just what I'm saying. It's sort of a both and, where it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but um, if you're, 5'8" and drop dead gorgeous as a woman, like, your life might be a little easier than your sibling who is not so comely. That it's just so. And in a certain sense, our sibling relationships may be the first opportunity to countenance the reality that we all got dealt a different hand.
And I think that's exactly here in the Cain and Abel story, because it just says, Yahweh, he said, for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. In other words, get over it. Don't take it out on your brother, and don't collect all kinds of grievances of, you did this and you did that for him and you didn't do that for me. Do well, run your own race. Do well for yourself. Grow your vegetables. You'll be the inheritor of your father's farmlands. Play your hand. Be who you are, regardless of what seems like parental approval of God the Father or whatever. You have to come into yourself and do what you can with yourself to have a productive, happy, stable, individuated life.
It also has something to do with displacement. I mean, Cain is angry, but he's not willing to say, I'm angry at you,
Yeah.
God.
Wouldn't dare.
Because God's the one that made it feel bad.
Right.
Abel had nothing to do with it. So we're also how siblings feel that they can't really vent whatever their response is to the parent. So then it goes out sideways. He's not going to feel murderous towards God, but he's going to vent it over to Abel because he's the one in reach, and it's the place where it's permissible or even possible, frankly, to be able to express that. So I think this idea of displacement is swinging around all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a real moment, and we see this in analysis, where a kid can go as an adult to their parents and say, I was angry about this or disappointed in that. To have the courage and clarity to speak to their experience of being the child of that parent. It's hard for kids to do that.
And one way or another, we all hopefully have to survive our childhoods psychologically and emotionally. The stuff that did happen, the kid who did seem like the favorite, the one who did get more of the resources. I mean, I've known people where, the first kid gets to go to college, especially if it's a male. Or some advantage given to the oldest son, and so it goes. We have to come to terms with it, without displacing our own anger and resentment onto another sibling, or blaming mom and dad.
I was going to lay down a new thread. Which is that our siblings are the first society that we belong to.
That's right.
That's great. Yeah.
Siblings provide constant social feedback.
Yeah.
So they may teach you to toughen up. They may teach you how to handle conflict. They might show you your weaknesses. And so siblings function as socializing agents for each other. And then there was a research project at Cambridge University that found that siblings, even if they squabble a lot, accelerate a young child's development of social understanding. And in this study, they found that children with siblings often have a more advanced theory of mind by the time they're 6 years old.
That's great.
And theory of mind being an ability to understand other people's thoughts and feelings. And so the sibling society is then the entry into society at large.
Yeah. And we can turn to our siblings. I mean, often what siblings do is it get us down off our high horse. The rest of the world may see you as the supervisor of the XYZ department or, some other thing. But to me, you're just Jim. So come on in and, and that there's an intimacy and a way to cast off persona with siblings, because come on, I've known you ever since you were 2 years old or the time when you, so there's a comfort there.
Well, to maybe though flip that around and pick up on what Joseph was saying and to go back to our main topic of rivalry, is that idea about kind of having to jostle a little bit as a young kid and therefore gain those skills of theory of mind and have this experience of society. These kinds of issues come up in sibling-like relationships ever going forward. So when we were in analytic training, there were issues of sibling rivalry, like who got to, who passed all their exams first, and did the rest of us feel left behind and resentful? I remember one of our compadres, passed all of her exams, and we were all sort of confronted with, are you feeling some sibling rivalry? And there's a sense of competition in professional environments and in academic environments, and there can even be sort of like if there's a kind of sibling transference in an analytic relationship, there can be kind of rivalry that comes up.
And all the case colloquia where there's a supervising analyst, and it does come up of like, oh my God, he was just so focused on you. And I was trying to get a word in edgewise about it. It is just a given. And we do, I mean, for a lot of healthy reasons, compare ourselves with others. Of these are my peers, they're getting ahead, I'm not. What does that mean? Maybe it can evoke an inferiority complex, all kinds of things, or the famous Smothers Brothers refrain where I think it's Tommy that says, "Mom always liked you best." We're humans. We have some of the same tribal and hierarchical innate instincts that some of our other mammalian species have.
So siblings, if it's a healthy family, the sibling is a natural ally and a sparring partner. And that allows us to kind of develop a certain toughness, but also an ability to be relational and to be attached to someone other than our parents as well. Because the sibling introduces the horizontal attachment.
That's
while
great.
The parents, you're dealing with a vertical attachment, both of which have very important components to them. But the horizontal attachment is what you're going to be carrying into your first job and into school and your marriage, for that matter. So, and it reminds me, as you were saying, Lisa, about where this shows up in non-biological relationships, which we've talked about Gilgamesh and Enkidu. They start as sparring partners, that they're fighting, and then Gilgamesh triumphs, doesn't kill Enkidu, but makes him submit, much like an older brother, and then they're inseparable. And they're going off in these great heroic quests. So allies and sparring partners. And often the ally part really comes forward when something bad has happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there might be bickering in the family, but you get a terrible diagnosis or you wind up in some really serious trouble. Often the siblings rally and they show up like Bluebeard. You know, the girl is promised to Bluebeard. She's sent off. Not an unusual thing for an arranged marriage in the ancient world, but when things go bad, it's that, group of brothers that gallop in and rescue her. They're not sending her fruit baskets prior to that. There's no comment about them attending the wedding or asking how she's doing. It's when things become dire that the siblings show up and their allegiance is clear.
I think I'd like to go back and kind of highlight or amplify how important it is that there be enough resources in a family for every child. And that this idea of there's a closeness and sparring partners in your siblings. And this New York Times article that I've referenced before, it gives an example of a family called the Groffs, and they sparred and they competed and they differentiated from one another with grades and writing and athletics. And when one sister said she wanted to swim across this lake, the name of which I don't remember, the family supported her and somebody's rowing along in a boat while she swims this 9-mile lake, sets a record. Another one of her siblings said, I'd like to try it too, and could have beaten her sister's record. But that sibling had her own niche and therefore allowed her sister to have the best time. Now that, to me, this is my projection, but what a great family that there was enough for everybody. And that sibling could say, no, I need to let my sister win this one. If every kid has his or her place and there's enough to go around, it makes a huge difference.
And if we take that to an extreme of deprivation, where the home is traumatogenic, then what happens is the siblings bond in a way that excludes the parents as a way of surviving. And then we have that wonderful fairy tale, The Children of Lear, where the mother dies, the stepmother comes in, curses the first children, turn them into swans for 600 years. And it's the eldest sister who shelters the little ones under her wings in storm and deprivation. But then the kids become a survival tribe, and then we get this term trauma bonding. And so those sibling relationships can be particularly intense throughout the life.
Yeah, I've seen traumatic households generate exactly what you're talking about, Joseph, and I've seen almost the exact opposite.
Yes.
That it can be really split, and I suspect that it has to do with one, the parent maybe kind of favoring one child and the other child really just carrying all of the shadow and the majority of the trauma. And so, it can either really pull kids together and then you get that kind of Hansel and Gretel kind of dynamic.
Yes.
Or it really, really splits. Both of those.
Right. And there are two books about this. One is a childhood story. I've been so surprised how many people are familiar with it, called The Boxcar Children. And these are 6 kids without a parent, and they live in a boxcar that has been derailed, and they make it into their house. And each child has some way of contributing, and the oldest brother is very, very resourceful. And they're all such a close, helpful, cooperative, mutual aid society. And then there are the 3 children in the story, Prince of Tides, where it's, as we say today, a dysfunctional family with a particularly difficult father. And the 3 kids bond together out of necessity. that in the face of hardship, they cling to one another.
And speaking about sibling groups, I'd like to take a moment to talk about dream school.
I like how you just
It just occurred
slipped
to
that
me.
in there, Joseph.
You've been waiting all this time.
I know, just couldn't wait
Go
to get
for
it
it.
out. One of the ways that we also create sibling-like relations later in life is to find people that have a common value system.
Mm-hmm.
So people find sibling-styled relationships in a number of environments, and it's not uncommon for people that love Jungian thought to want to come together, whether it's creating a Jung society, joining a study group,
Or starting a podcast.
or starting a podcast as we did. And also, there's an opportunity. We have an online learning program, which we call Dream School, this Jungian Life Dream School. And the many hundreds of people that have come through the school, it's not just that they learn how to interpret their dreams, but they interact with each other and help each other and come together in this unified fund of values and interest. And that creates a working sibling community. I don't know that people necessarily talk about that consciously, but it's really obvious when I do the live Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
I'll often, as I'm giving a lecture, in the chat stream, I see people helping each other. Someone will ask a question. I'm in the middle of giving a lecture, and 4 or 5 people will rush right in and say, hey, here's a resource. Here's an idea. Try this, try that. All of this support around the particular concept comes forward. And after the Q&A, often, actually every session, I just disappear and leave the Zoom session up and running so people can actually just socialize with each other.
Oh, that's really nice.
They do. And the older students help the younger students, just the way it is in a family. So Dream School is part of that horizontal relationship, but it's a bond around values and philosophies, and probably most important, a group of cohorts that are committed to self-actualization equally in the way that you are. So if that's interesting, and I hope it is, go over to thisjungianlife.com, click on Dream School, and take a look at that offering. We would love to add you to our family.
And with that, perhaps it is time to switch to a dream. And Joseph, would you take it away and share this week's dream with us?
Sure, sis. Today's dreamer is a 27-year-old male, and his job is in patient services and is a representative at a mental health clinic and is also a graduate student. He titles this dream, The Bones of Jesus. My mom and I were in the parking lot of a church. We stood in front of what seemed to be a circular fountain structure, but instead of it being filled with water, it was filled with dirt. We were supposed to help dig the dirt. As soon as I started to dig, I noticed human bones with an electric blue color to them, a full skeleton and skull, but wearing a crown of thorns. I became ecstatic because I realized these were the bones of Jesus. I was so moved by this experience, but also slightly terrified, since I technically just dug up a dead body. I felt like I made a world-changing discovery, which also came with a dual sense of exhilaration and heaviness. However, my excitement came to a halt when it became revealed to me that it was all a fake. Someone passing by told me that these were not real bones, but a kit of fake bones to fool people into believing they've dug up Jesus. I immediately felt stupid and shameful that I let myself get so excited by something that was not real. For context, he writes, this dream came to me at a time where I was just starting graduate school to pursue filmmaking as a career. I believe, or wanted to believe, there's immense spiritual value in the arts, However, I sometimes question whether this path I am pursuing is an actual calling or inauthentic posturing that I'm taking for egotistical purposes. The main feelings in the dream were shock, excitement, immense gravity, followed by extreme disappointment and shame. And for a bit of context, he adds, my mother is the most religious in our family. She completed all 12 years of grade school in Catholic school. I was raised Catholic but went to public school. The parking lot in the dream feels like the parking lot of the church I went to as a kid.
It's such a kind of compelling image, and I think it's sort of bivalent. When we meet the numinous, can we trust it, or what does it mean, in fact, to come across something numinous? And I think I'm responding maybe just sort of philosophically for a minute to the dream. But I'm curious about the person who comes along and says, no, no, this is all a fake, because I'm not sure if we should believe that part of the psyche or not.
I have the same feeling.
Mm-hmm. And but there is a way that we think we've discovered the answer. So again, that kind of like late 20s transition, what we sometimes talk about on the podcast is Saturn return. You are at this point in your life where you're establishing your values. And you may become disillusioned with something that you believed that was true up until that point. I mean, that certainly happened to me. I thought I had found my calling. And then it was like, oh no, that's not the thing. That's not the thing. And it was pretty devastating, actually, that loss of a sense of a kind of a clear compass, that this was going to be the thing that was going to kind of give my life meaning. And having to let that go and just remain kind of empty-handed in the void while I waited for something else to come forward. So it seems to me like this is a very important dream that kind of lays out this critical moment that I think a lot of people face. And what can you believe in? And what does it mean to be disillusioned, in a sense?
It reminds me of a process that I think all of us need to go through regarding our religion, is that the religion of our childhood, the symbols and ideas that we're taught when we're very young, are kind of titrated and languaged with the idea that this is how you would explain it to a child. And that often sets up the foundational ideas and images for the religion. And by the time we reach adulthood, those religious ideas are not adequate for an adult psyche. Like, I remember being a little kid and I went to Bible camp, and I was the most religious of the entire family and remained that way. And the first time I saw like an icon of a lamb holding a flag, and somebody told me that was Jesus, it was incredibly disturbing. I had no way to understand that. So these really early experiences shape things, but often, and the Saturn return is a great time, we have to unearth the religious stories and teachings that were given us at our mother's knee to re-examine them and find, is this an adequate religious attitude? Is this an adequate understanding of my own faith to carry me forward in an adult world and with the kind of sophistication that you certainly have at 27, but would not have had at 7? So we do have to unearth and rethink, because God probably isn't an old man with a beard, and I don't think Jesus is a lamb carrying a flag.
Right.
But those are all pointing to much greater truths that as adults we can mine for great relevance. But we might have to give up some of our youthful superstitions almost.
I'm going back just to as I often do, to the very beginning of the dream and the mother complex. My mom and I were in the parking lot of a church. There's a lot right there. Mom and me.
And the mother church.
In a parking lot where things are stationary, nothing moves. and the mother, of course, the mother church. So another huge symbol here is we stood in front of what seemed to be a circular fountain structure, but it was filled with dirt. We, Mom and I, were supposed to help dig the dirt. So what would it mean if you saw in waking life, if you came across a fountain that's circular, that where things are supposed to circulate, go up and down as fountains do, and it's filled with dirt?
It's actually a ubiquitous thing because a lot of old fountains, the mechanisms break down, and rather than do a very difficult repair and ripping up paving to put in new piping, people will often fill them with dirt and turn them into planters because there's a structure there, but it does imply that it's a kind of a compensation, a reutilizing of something that stopped working at some point, that the waters of life stopped flowing. We're not going to do what's required to fix it, but we are going to make use of the structure. We're not going to raise it.
Well, and also, you think about especially like a circular fountain. I mean, that is a pretty religious image. It's the fountain of spirit in a sense, and like you're saying, the waters of life are circulating there, and somehow the element of water has been replaced by the element of earth, which is also an important element, but it does say we're in a sort of different key now.
And dirt doesn't belong in fountains. That's not why a fountain was created. So it might be, as you were saying, Joseph, might be plan B. If the fountain isn't working, let's turn it into a planter. But fountains are for water, not for dirt.
Yes.
I was thinking, too, about this discovery of the human bones. And again, this is sort of an example of how one's mind can wander into some funny memory that doesn't seem related, but let's see if it is, which is when our grandson was, maybe 6, 7, and we all lived in New York City. He loved to go to the Natural History Museum where they had these big sand pits for kids. And you could dig up dinosaur bones and dinosaur eggs. And of course, everything was planted there for the kids to find, and then they just had a ball being miniature archaeologists or something like that. But it somehow feels like that would it be that easy? Would it be that simple of like, let's just dig around in the dirt and find the thing of sublime value somehow buried in the dirt of a fountain? Like, really?
And it's painted electric blue.
Right.
So there's something questionable and innocent about thinking that the electric blue bones, by virtue of the crown of thorns,
Yeah.
now I've rediscovered Christ.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of it, is he feels like he's rediscovered Christ and then has to question that. Is this really a spiritual revelation, or is this something else? It still could be valuable.
Well, and I think that's a really key point. What you just said, Joseph, is like, it's like it may not be what we thought it was, but there may still be value in it. And that is this. I mean, whether it's actual religion or maybe in his case, his sense about the arts, that we do tend to invest things with extraordinary meaning, especially in young adulthood. It's an idealistic time. And then we may lose our ideals, but it's not so much that we have to just become a kind of just a cynic at that point.
Right.
But there's a kind of both andness of it that we can hold, that it may not be the world-changing discovery that we thought it was, and yet it may still have value, even if it's just the feeling experience that we had as we made the discovery.
If you found the bones of Jesus, you have then disproved the entire theological fantasy, because Jesus rose from the dead and took his bones and everything else up to
Yeah.
heaven. So if you actually found the bones of Jesus, he's no longer as holy, he didn't resurrect, and he's been turned into a kind of artifact, an archaeologic artifact. And if it really was the bones of Jesus, you would be disproving the central tenet of the Catholic Church. So when he says, I'm so moved and I'm terrified, it's a world-changing discovery. And at first, we could be tricked into thinking it's a world-changing discovery because he's proved that Jesus is real, but it's also a world-changing discovery because he's disproved the entire mythopoetic story.
But I think what's of value here, and this reminds me of, I can never remember which night it is, but the night that sees the Grail, Parsifal, he sees the Grail. It's numinous and luminous. He sees the thing of supreme value.
Yes.
Of the goal of the opus, the goal of our life's work, the goal of individuation. But then he has to spend the rest of his life looking for it.
Because you never really get the thing, right? You'll never really get the bones of Jesus.
So I don't want to discount this incredible feeling of that it's miraculous, and I've had a vision of something of inordinate, unspeakable value.
Yeah.
But it's not this thing, because it's not out there. It's in here.
So I'll tell a story related to that, which is Deb and I a few years ago got to go to Jung's house in Zurich, and we were in his office, and there's this chair, and across the room there's this like picture frame that's covered, and I certainly didn't break any rules, but I was able to kind of peer behind. I was really, what is covered behind that? And somehow I was able, I don't remember now how I saw it, if I pulled it aside a little bit. But what it was an image of the Shroud of Turin, which is a fake. But that image, and Jung didn't know it was a fake, right? He died in 1961. So I imagine that there was still, a lot of people believed that it might actually be sort of an image of Christ. Now it's been conclusively disproven. But there it is. It's like the face of Christ was looking at him, and in a way, it doesn't matter that it was a fake, because it had a significance to Jung, that image. But I did want to say, Joseph, I find your point so interesting about the bones of Christ and what that means about the myth. But in a way, is it possible to think about it like the myth has kind of come down into earth in a way, that the myth is kind of being changed as it interacts with this person's psyche, and now maybe Christ needs to be a little bit more embodied and kind of leave his bones behind in the dirt. I don't know. That's a super interesting idea.
I often think the medicine in the dream goes from the attitude at the beginning of the dream, and then what's the attitude at the end.
Right.
And everything in between is plucking you along to get to the final attitude. And the final attitude is, I was excited by something that wasn't real.
Yeah.
So even if we take the religious domain around it, there's something about how the psyche holds what is real and what is not real, and what is his relationship to the unseen world. One of the things that can be so difficult is that we demand or prefer a concretized, empirical fact in order to get excited. But so much of what Jung's discovery is that the inner world of the psyche, it's an inner landscape, and the images, the power, the libido, the feelings are real, even though they aren't concrete objects in the outer world that other people can handle.
Yeah.
And this is where I think a lot of people get really trapped relative to their religious function, is that the empirical mind, which some people call the Luciferic aspect, won't let you have faith in something unless it's an object that you can put your hands on.
That's interesting.
And I get it, and I certainly would want that, relative to my car.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to
Right.
drive a mythic car. I really need a car that I can, put a key in and get it running.
Yeah.
But when it comes to things like connecting to the self, that's probably not going to be an object. Although people in the Middle Ages spent fortunes buying relics of the bones of saints because it was so miraculous to think it would be an object and it would protect you from the plague, by granting you these spiritual protections. But the discovery of Christ, if that is what he is seeking, it won't be found in bones. And it won't be found in the bones of the religious rituals of the church of your childhood. You have to find the living Christ, which is an image and a symbol and a set of feelings and philosophies that really live in your soul.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.